You want answers?
I think I'm entitled.
You want answers?
I want the truth!
You can't handle the truth.
All right, hey everybody, this is Sergeant O here. Welcome back to Why You Can't Handle the Truth. And yeah, this is take 2. Yesterday I went live, everything looked like it was working. I could hear myself in the headphones, everything seemed fine on my end until I went live and somehow you guys couldn't hear a damn thing I was saying. Today I come back to do it again and now both my cameras I normally use won't connect. So I ended up pulling out this old cheap wired camera. Then I had to set up everything, the configurations and messing with it, trying to get the colors right, trying to get the picture right, just trying to get this damn show started. And at this point, I started to laugh because it really feels like something does not want me talking about what I'm about to talk about. Sound goes out, cameras won't work. Everything that was working suddenly decides not to work. Well, fuck that. I'm not the kind of person that takes the hint and shuts the hell up. If anything, that just makes me want to say it louder. So whether it's technical problems, bad luck, evil, whatever the hell you want to call it, nothing's going to shut me the fuck up because I think this subject matters. Today I want to talk about something I call toxic empathy. Not compassion, not caring about people. I'm talking about what happens when empathy gets so emotional, so political, and so tribal that right and wrong stops mattering. And I'm not coming at you as somebody who never understood the anger. Growing up in Los Angeles, I saw police abuse. I saw injustice. I saw cops overstep. As a younger man, I understood why people were pissed off. Hell, I supported a lot of that anger. But getting older made me look back at my own life a little differently. And speaking personally, there were times I felt harassed by police when, well, if I'm being real with myself, I usually was doing shit I probably shouldn't have been doing. Maybe not at that exact same second time. Maybe they didn't know the whole story. But I also wasn't exactly an altar boy. And over time, that made me start asking a different question. What happens when we become so afraid of being called unfair that we stop holding anybody accountable at all? Because lack of accountability creates problems too. And that brings me to this movement I once truly believed was about justice. The older I get, the more I look back at the money, the politics, the outrage machine, the people who became powerful from it, and the more I ask whether the people were really the priority. And after watching recent cases, watching what people have said online, watching people celebrate death, threaten families, slander people, talk about killing somebody's brother too, even disrespecting their graves, something changed for me. That stopped looking like justice. It started looking like tribalism. A culture movement where right and wrong becomes secondary to the color of your skin, or your politics, or which team you belong to. And that scares the hell out of me because I remember feeling like America was moving in the direction Martin Luther King Jr. talked about, where we're judged by our character and not the color of our skin. And now, sometimes it feels like we're walking backwards. The behavior we condemned in the past doesn't magically become acceptable because a different group is doing it. Wrong is wrong. Racism is racism. Hatred is hatred. See, I'm Native American. My people were here before any of these political parties, before any of these movements, before any of these arguments. So I feel like I have the right to sit here and say, enough. And I'm not the only one saying it. I've watched people like Branham Tatum, Anthony Bryan, Logan, The Righteous Perspective, I think his name is Brother Wise, C.G. Pearson, and others willing to take the heat from their own communities because they believe something has gone badly wrong. And I want to throw my hat in that ring too. But my goal is not to slander anybody. I'm not here to make you hate anybody. I'm not here to rile you up and send you after anybody. I'm here to point out what I believe is obvious. And sometimes what people don't want to see or admit, I just ask that you think. Watch this once, watch it twice. Good luck if you watch it twice, it's going to be a long one. Turn the emotional down for a minute and ask yourself, is this actually right? Or is it only right because my side told me it was? And for those of you who believe in God, I'd ask an even harder question. If you stood before God tomorrow and had to explain the hatred, the threats, the lies, the racial tribalism, and the way you treated people you decided were your enemy, would you be proud of that explanation? Now, I don't call myself a Christian because I don't believe I live Christ-like enough to wear that title without feeling hypocritical. But I do believe there is God. I believe in his laws. I defend Christians. I love them with my heart. And I believe right and wrong still means something, whether your political side wins or loses. So before emotion takes control, shut it off for a minute and listen. Think. And then decide. Because when every tragedy becomes a racial narrative before the facts are even settled, I don't see justice anymore. I see toxic empathy. And that brings me to two names. Now, I'm only going to say this once and describe them because this is how I feel about them. I'm talking about Reverend without a church, Al Sharpton, and it's all about the Benjamin Crump. Because if you watch racial controversy in America over the last several decades, you've probably seen one or both somewhere near the microphone. And today I'm going to say something some people are not going to like. From everything I've watched over the years, I believe these two men have played major roles in a machine that can take racial controversy, push it into the court of public opinion, and get American emotionally convicted before the actual evidence has even been heard. That's my opinion. And I'm going to explain exactly why I believe that. This isn't me saying racism doesn't exist. It does. This isn't me saying police never do anything wrong. They do. And this isn't me saying every person Sharpton or Crump has ever stood beside was lying. I'm saying something different. I'm saying when race, politics, grief, activism, television, lawyer, money, and social media all collide before the facts are settled, dangerous shit can happen. People get threatened, reputations get destroyed, businesses get burned, communities get divided, somebody gets called a murderer or a racist before anybody has proved a damn thing. And sometimes, months or years later, the evidence looks a hell of a lot more complicated than the original narrative. Now, right now, with this whole Nolan Wells case, I feel like I'm watching the machine fire up again. Before we get there, you got to understand why I don't automatically trust the people standing at the microphone. Before Benjamin Crump, before Black Lives Matter, before George Floyd, before Trayvon Martin, before Nolan Wells, there was Al Sharpton. Sharpton has been doing this for decades. He came up around Jesse Jackson's Operation Breadbasket. He got involved in political young, and yes, he worked around James Brown, the Godfather of Soul, as a tour manager and his promoter. So this was somebody who understood crowds, attention, cameras, emotion, and show business. And in my opinion, That became one of his greatest political weapons later in life, because what I see when I look at Sharpton's history is a man who learned how to take a racial controversy and turn it into a national event. Not necessarily by waiting for every fact, not necessarily by waiting for a trial, but by getting the public emotionally invested first. And once the public is emotionally invested, good luck getting people to slow down or look at facts that complicate the story. One of the clearest reasons I don't automatically trust that process is, a good example is Tawana Brawley. In 1987, a 15-year-old Tawana Brawley disappeared and was later found in a garbage bag. Her clothing was damaged, racial slurs were written all over her body, she was covered in feces, and she claimed she had been kidnapped and raped by a group of white men, including law enforcement officials. If you hear a story like that, of course you want to investigate. Anybody with a heart does. But here's where my issues begin. Al Sharpton didn't just say, let's investigate this and see what happened. He became one of the loudest public voice advancing the allegations, specifically people who were accused, including prosecutor Stephen Pagonis. And when you publicly accuse somebody of being involved in a rape, that ain't a small accusation. That can destroy somebody's life. Then investigators dug into the evidence, and grand jury reviewed medical records, physical evidence, and extensive witness testimony. The case began to fall apart. The evidence did not support the rape allegations. The circumstances of Brawley's physical condition did not match the story that had been told, and the writing on her body raised questions about self-application. And one of the strangest details of the entire case was the feces material was traced to a neighborhood dog. By then, the thing was already a national racial controversy. People had picked sides, people had been accused, reputations had already been damaged. And then the grand jury concluded that Brawley had not been abducted or raped as claimed. Pagonis sued Sharpton and others over the accusation, and Sharpton was found liable for defamatory statements. Now, think about what that means. Imagine somebody nationally attaches your name to a rape, television, newspaper, protester, people believing you're a monster, and then later the evidence does not support it. How do you put the people's lives back together? You don't. You cannot say, my bad, we were trying to do the right thing. What about the person you falsely accuse? What about his family? What about everybody who heard the accusation but never heard the correction? That is the danger of trying somebody before the court of public opinion, before the facts are settled. And in my opinion, Tawana Brawley should have been the moment Al Sharpton said, maybe I need to slow the hell down next time. But that's not what I saw happen. Sharpton continued becoming one of America's most recognizable voices whenever another racial controversy exploded. Crown Heights, Freddie Fashion Mart, decades of provocative racial rhetoric. And I'm not going to tell you that Sharpton personally caused every riot, assault, or death that happened around one of these controversies. I couldn't even begin to prove that. But leaders are responsible for the understanding that the power of the word. If you got a crowd already angry, already divided, already convinced that somebody from another race is the enemy, and you are standing there with a microphone, you had better understand what you're doing. Leadership is not seeing how angry you can make the room. Leadership is knowing when the room is getting too damn hot. From what I watched throughout Sharpton's career, I believe he repeatedly understood that outrage, understood cameras, understood racial pressure, and understood how to keep a controversy alive. Then Barack Obama became president. Now, let me word this correctly. Obama did not hire Al Sharpton as a cabinet secretary or make him an official White House employee. what Obama did was give Sharpton something extremely valuable: legitimacy. Access to the White House, meetings, a seat at the table, recognition as somebody whose voice mattered in national conversation about race, voting, and civil rights. Here's my opinion. I believe Obama knew exactly who Al Sharpton was. He knew the history. He knew Tawana Brawley. He knew the controversies. He knew the rhetoric. And he elevated him anyways. I believe racial division became politically useful. And I believe Al Sharpton was already one of the best people in America at working that division. Then you give that guy White House legitimacy? You have taken somebody who already understands racial pressure and handed him a bigger stage. This is where my own life affects how I look at all of this. I've served in the military. I spent time outside the country. I lived in different parts of America. I watched this country change with my own eyes. I remember leaving California during a period when crime in certain neighborhoods felt rough. Then I'm overseas in Germany. I come back and I remember looking around and thinking, damn, things are actually looking better. It was different, safer, cleaner. Like we were moving in the right direction. Then I lived in Georgia for almost a couple of decades, and I'm talking Noonan, Georgia, redneck Georgia. Probably not now, and my personal experience did not match the picture of America. Was constantly being sold. I wasn't walking around and having white people treat me like garbage. I wasn't living some racist hellhole. That was not my experience. Ironically, more of the racial tensions I personally noticed came when I went to Atlanta. That's my experience. Now, I'm not telling anybody else. My experience. I'm telling you what I saw. Now, let me tell you what, I didn't see it consistently, but it was there. And I remember coming back from Germany feeling proud about America, like we were moving towards something Martin Luther King Jr. had dreamed about, judging people more by who they were and not the color of their skin. And then I moved back to California in 2015. And over time, to me, it started feeling like the clock was moving backwards. Crime, homelessness, disorder, division, everything political, everything racial. And I look at what happened nationally under Obama and what I watch here in California under politicians like Gavin Newsom. And in my opinion, none of this happened in a vacuum. I believe how politicians discovered that dividing people can be useful. Black versus white, rich versus poor, citizens versus immigrants, men versus women, left versus right. Keep everybody pissed off at everybody else, and nobody looks up and asks what the people running the damn government are doing. Race might be most powerful division of all. And Al Sharpton understood that. He understood that world long before Barack Obama became president. And in my opinion, Sharp helped build the blueprint. Then along comes Benjamin Crump, my apologies. This is where the whole thing involves. Al Sharpton is the activist. Sharpton is the microphone. Sharpton is the rally. Sharpton is the racial pressure. Benjamin Crump comes in wearing a suit, carrying the title civil rights attorney, then changes the atmosphere. Because now the public pressure becomes wrapped in legal language. I was listening to Judge Joe Brown talk about Crump, and Brown was absolutely tearing into him. Whatever you think about Judge Joe Brown politically, this is someone who has been a prosecutor, been a judge, sat on the bench, watched lawyers litigate, listened to evidence, and dealt with juries. Brown's criticism made me stop and ask an important question. How much of Crump's power is really about traditional trial litigation, and how much is about litigating a case in front of us, the public? Brown questioned the image that Crump has, this legendary courtroom civil rights litigator, and the criticism connects directly with something Crump himself has discussed, the court of public opinion. When I hear that phrase, I thought, there it is. Maybe we're the jury. Not 12 people screened through a voir dire. Not 12 people instructed by a judge. Not 12 people told not to watch television, not to read social media, to presume innocence, to follow rules of evidence. Us. Millions of emotional Americans watching clips, headlines, press conferences, and grieving families. And if you win that jury first, think about the pressure you can create. Pressure on the city, pressure on police departments, pressure on prosecutors, pressure on elected officials, pressure on companies, pressure on everybody making a legal and financial decision. The actual jury may not have heard one witness yet, but the country already screaming what the verdict should be. Now that's power. And that is the court of public opinion. Court of public opinion has no rules of evidence. Nobody gets cross-examined. Nobody has to prove anything beyond a reasonable doubt. The defense might not even have spoken yet. You just need the more emotional story. And if race is a part of that story, now you've got the gasoline. Because then somebody questioning the narrative isn't just disagreeing. Now they're racist. Now they're against justice. Now they're against black people. Now they're defending murder. That shuts people up. That's why I think this method deserves scrutiny. Sharpton knows how to create outrage. Crump knows how to attach legal language to the outrage. Civil rights, wrongful death, accountability, justice. And then the camera rolls. And here's the question nobody likes asking. What happens if the public narrative is wrong? Does the network rebuild the accused person's reputation? Does the activist apologize for the death threats? Does anybody repair the businesses that was destroyed? Does anybody put the family back together? No. The story moves on. The story moves on, and that's why Tawana Brawley still matters, because we already seen what happens when the accusations get ahead of the truth. And now let's talk about one of the biggest turning points in modern America. Trayvon Martin. To me, this was one of the moments where America stopped simply watching a criminal case and started consuming a racial narrative. Benjamin Crump represented Trayvon Martin's family. Al Sharpton got involved. The case exploded nationally. George Zimmerman became one of the most hated men in America. The public story became simple. White guy follows black kid. Black kid winds up dead. Racism, murder, justice for Trayvon. But then the actual trial happened. Zimmerman said Trayvon attacked him. Zimmerman had documented injuries. The defense argued that he fired because he feared serious injury. The jury heard the evidence, acquitted George Zimmerman. Then Obama Justice Department examined whether there was enough evidence for a federal civil rights prosecution and declined because prosecutors concluded that they could not prove the required intention civil rights violation beyond a reasonable doubt. Now, I know this part pisses people off, and I'm telling you how to see it. I'm telling you how to see it. I do not believe Trayvon Martin was proven to have been wrongfully murdered. I mean, that's my opinion from the evidence I've seen. And I'm not saying Zimmerman made every perfect decision that night. I probably wouldn't have followed Trayvon. But following somebody does not automatically make you guilty of murder. And it does not automatically erase your right to defend yourself if the encounter later becomes physical. I've had people follow me. I've had people watch me. I've had people suspicious of what I was doing. And I didn't like it. But I didn't turn around and beat somebody's ass because I felt disrespected. That's where I think the public narrative became more powerful than the legal reality. By the time Zimmerman sat in front of a jury, A huge part of America had already decided what to happen. The emotional verdict came first. The courtroom came second. And once the story became black kid hunted down by a racist white man, how do you later introduce the nuance? How do you talk about the injuries? Who initiated the physical fight? Reasonable doubt, self-defense. How do we even ask those questions without somebody accusing you of defending racism? See, that's a trap. Trayvon became more than a person. He became a symbol. And the emotional and political energy around that case helped build an environment in which Black Lives Matter would later emerge. Then came George Floyd. This is where, in my opinion, everything went nuclear. The video hits the internet. Derek Chauvin becomes the face of a racist policing. George Floyd becomes the symbol. Before most people had seen the complete body camera footage, toxicology report, medical testimony, and prior history, America had already decided what happened. The court of public opinion rendered its verdict first. Now, I want to be clear about the legal reality. Derek Chauvin was convicted. He later pleaded guilty to a federal civil rights charge. Those things happened. My personal opinion is different. I believe Chauvin became a scapegoat for a death that was medically and factually more complicated than the public narrative allowed people to discuss. George Floyd had fentanyl in his blood, approximately 11 nanograms per millimeter. He also had methamphetamine in his system. Underlying his health problem, there is no single magic fentanyl number where every human being dies. Tolerance matters, health matters, other drugs matter. But a lot of people have died, I believe, at 3 or 4 nanograms in their body. He had 11. But don't tell me drugs suddenly became irrelevant because they're inconvenient to the story. Then there's another fact that matters too. George Floyd was saying, "I can't breathe," before Derek Chauvin had him restrained on the ground. While officers were trying to put Floyd into the police vehicle, he was already telling them he couldn't breathe and that he was claustrophobic. But he's done this several times in the past. He was already in distress. That does not by itself prove what ultimately killed him, but it absolutely complicates the simplified timeline people were given. And then in his prior 2019 police encounter, in which evidence came in concerning Floyd swallowing drugs when confronted by officers. And during the 2020 encounter, the defense pointed to a body camera footage showing what appeared to be a white object around the tongue of Floyd. Does one frame prove exactly what he swallowed? No. But I'm allowed to look at the entire picture. Prior drug swallowing behavior, fentanyl, methamphetamine, heart disease, breathing complications before the ground restraint, his overall physical condition, and then reach my conclusion. My opinion is that drugs played a much larger role in George Floyd's death than national story allowed people to discuss. And in my eyes, Derek Chauvin became the man the country needed to punish after the country had already exploded. Now, you can disagree with me, but here's the bigger point. Even if you completely disagree about Chauvin, look at what happened outside the courtroom. Millions of people protested peacefully. That is true. There was also rioting, looting, arson, violence, business destroyed, communities damaged, fear. Two things can be true at the same time. You can believe police misconduct should be addressed and still say burning somebody's business down is wrong. You can believe Black Lives Matter and still say looting the store does not bring any justice. You can demand accountability and still demand evidence. But somewhere along the way, questioning the narrative itself became almost offensive. Then Black Lives Matter. became a massive political and cultural force. One of its co-founders, Patrice Cullors, I believe her name is, publicly described herself and Alicia Garza as trained Marxists. Massive attention, money flowed into the movement, and George Floyd became a martyr in the American political culture. Murals, speeches, legislations, his name became larger than the man himself. And I started asking the question, I still ask now, why this victim? Why does this particular death become a national symbol while other victims barely get remembered? Why do some families get Crump, Sharpton, cameras, national pressure, while others get almost nothing? So let me ask you straight. Whose civil rights count? If this machine is really about justice and protecting victims, the outrage should be consistent. It should not depend on whether the victim fits the right racial narrative. It should not depend on whether the accused fits the right political narrative. It should not depend on whether a white cop, a white defendant, or a conservative institution standing on the other side. Let's take Ava Moore, for instance, 18 years old, Air Force Academy bound, great kids, just success and everything. She was out kayaking at the Grapevine Lakes in Texas, where authorities said she was struck and killed by a jet ski. And the alleged operator was charged, and authorities said people involved were Venezuelan nationals unlawfully present in the United States. Where was Sharpton? Where was Crump? Where was the endless press conference? Where was the demand that politicians explain policy people believe contributed to the dangerous conditions? Let me say that again, because that's really important. Where was the demand that politicians explain policies put people in these kind of situations? Maybe somebody can show me something I missed. But I sure didn't see anything close to the national mobilization we see when racial or political setups point the other direction. Then you get Larisha Thompson. Black woman, mother, killed in South Carolina, multiple suspects charged with murder with immigration issues surrounding the accused. She's black, she's dead, her family lost somebody. Her life matters. So where was the same machine then? Where was the march, the microphone, the sustained national outrage? And that's when I started thinking, this may not be about race. Maybe it's about which direction the politics point. And the fact fit the story about racist America, racist police, racist white people, racist conservative. Here comes everybody. But if the facts point towards failed immigration policies, failed democratic leadership, or a victim whose story doesn't fit the same racial framework, the energy suddenly feels different. That's my observation. And that is why I believe political alignment is part of this. See, Benjamin Crump publicly endorsed Kamala Harris. Al Sharpton has spent years operating under the Democratic politicians and Democratic administration. Democrat candidates line up around his National Action Network. I'm not going to say they're trying to sit on both sides of the fence. I believe racial activism has too often been used as a political leverage. And I believe outrage is often selected. Somewhere along the way, we started losing the ability to ask one simple question. Was it right? Was it wrong? Now, the first question becomes, what color was the victim? What color was the accused? What political party are they? What group are they part of? Once everybody figures that out, then they decide what they believe. Isn't that kind of backwards? I'm not talking about every black person. I'm not talking about every black woman. Both people I meet are regular people living their lives. But I absolutely believe there is a loud political and cultural fraction Yo, racial loyalty has become more important than intellectual honesty, and when somebody breaks ranks, they get punished. Look at Stephen A. Smith. Stephen A. Smith has spent decades becoming one of the most recognizable black journalists, commentary in America, and has supported black journalists, mentored people, helped open doors, and built an enormous platform. Then the National Association of Black Journalists gives him a thumbs down award, criticizing what he described as a pattern of, or what they described as a pattern of disparaging commentary involving prominent black women. Smith objected that publicly, condemned him without first having a, how can they condemn without having a real conversation? And when he asked to publicly speak to him, they didn't want to speak to him, but you can publicly embarrass him? That bothers me. What happened to the disagreement? What happened to sitting down with somebody and saying, why'd you say that? What did you mean? Let's debate it. Instead, you publicly embarrass the guy. And from where I'm sitting, part of Stephen A. Smith is doing is refusing to play a political loyalty game. He criticized Democrats, Republicans, black politicians, white politicians. Apparently that becomes a problem when you criticize the wrong black person, huh? If a black woman on the right side says something stupid, criticize her. If a black woman on the left side says something stupid, criticize her. If a white guy says something stupid, smoke him. Everybody gets smoked. That's equality. You don't protect somebody from criticism because of the color of the skin. You don't call somebody a traitor to their race because they refuse to repeat approved political talking points. That is tribalism. And tribalism is exactly what Martin Luther King Jr.'s dream was supposed to move us away from. I remember coming back from Germany feeling proud about America, like we were moving towards judging people more than who they were than what they look like. Sometimes now it feels like we're marching backwards. Back towards racial camps, back towards collective guilt, back towards judging people by their skin color first. And what breaks my heart is this. The evil doesn't become good just because the skin color changes. Racism was wrong in the 1960s. Racial tribalism was wrong in the 1960s. And it is still wrong today, no matter who's doing it. Right is right, wrong is wrong. Skin color should not change the answer. This brings me back to Nolan Wells. I need to give Brandon Tatum credit for something. When this story first hit, I bought into it like a lot of people did in the original narrative too. Think about how it sounded. Young black man goes out on a boat with a group of white friends. The white friends come back. He doesn't. Then he's found dead. Come on now. That sounds suspicious as hell. If that's all you know, your mind starts filling in the blanks. Mine did too. Then Tatum started talking directly to people involved. He interviewed the young man. He gave them a chance to explain what happened instead of just letting social media explain it for them. And suddenly, the picture becomes a hell of a lot more complicated. This wasn't Nolan getting on some isolated boat with 3 or 4 white kids and disappearing into nowhere. Horn Island was packed for 4th of July. There were many boats, many groups, many people, all friends too. I'm not going to say every single one, but a lot were friends. The boat Nolan arrived on developed serious mechanical problems and was taking water. There was a sea tow call, and records put the group's departure from Horns Island approximately 4:31 p.m. Now, that matters because it changes the picture from these white kids took Nolan somewhere and came back without him to Nolan arrived at a massive island gathering with friends. Their boat became disabled. They left because of mechanical emergency. According to their account, Nolan chose to remain behind and find another ride. It was very common. It was very common to leave your phone on the floor. It was very common to leave your street. You know, if you see it, you can see why. Those are two radical different narratives. Friends have said Nolan wanted to remain behind. He had another ride. They said he urged him to leave with them. They said the boat was taking on water. They had to go. There has also been claims of later sighting of Nolan after the boat left. Now, I'm not going to treat every specific time claim as proven until the evidence established it, but the documented departure time itself matters. And if evidence established Nolan was alive after the group left, that is an enormous importance to evaluate accusation aimed at those boys. That is why Brandon Tatum matters in this story. Whether people like his politics or hate him or he did something important or he talked about people everybody else was talking about. Sometimes journalism is that you get simple statements. You go out there and you ask, stop telling me what somebody said, but put the microphone in front of them and let me hear it for myself. That's why I changed my view of the case. I started where a lot of people started, suspicious, emotionally leaning towards Nolan's parents, thinking something ain't right there. I still think there are unanswered questions. But people are scared. After everything they see, who's going to want to say anything? But after hearing these young men explain themselves, seeing more of the timeline, seeing how many people were actually on the island, and hearing about the broken boat, I had to adjust my thinking. New evidence comes in, change your damn opinion. That is not weakness, that's intellectual honesty. Tribalism says, I pick my side, nothing you show me is changing it. Truth says, show me everything and I'll go wherever the evidence takes me. Now let's bring it directly back to Nolan. This was an 18-year-old boy. He goes out 4th of July and does not come home alive. From the beginning, I understood why his parents wanted answers. If that was my son, yeah. I'd want every phone check, every witness, every interview, every boat. I'd be out there. But here's where I started changing my view, was when the case stopped being only about finding out what happened to Nolan and started to becoming about destroying the young men around him. Now we have boys being publicly accused, threatened, and harassed. Their parents are scared. Their names are being thrown around online like guilt has already been established. And from everything I've seen publicly, I do not believe the evidence currently justifies treating these boys as murderers. In my opinion, some of the evidence points in the opposite direction, towards them leaving while Nolan was still alive. And if that's true, people have been publicly destroying these kids over something they did not do. I watched the interviews, seen pictures, I heard Nolan's friends talk about him like somebody they genuinely cared about. One of the things that bothers me how easily people act as if those friendships do not count, because Nolan's parents may not have personally known every one of these young men. An 18-year-old has a life outside his parents. Friends, people he hangs out, people he talks to, people he may consider brothers. The fact that the parents doesn't know every detail doesn't automatically erase the friendship. That's why people like, his name's Tristan Shepard. That's why he matters, because publicly he described Nolan as somebody he loved and talked about the pain, the guilt, what happened. And he wasn't even on that boat. And I'm going to say something carefully. I cannot tell you what's in Nolan's parents' heart. I cannot measure how much they love their son. But based on what I've personally watched publicly, Nolan's parents appear to show tremendous concern for Nolan. They acknowledge the relationship their son had with him. They speak about him like he truly mattered to them. When I've seen publicly, I've not seen the same level of concern extended back towards these boys while these lives are being torn apart. And that's my observation. And that bothers me. Because these young men have parents too, futures too. They have to wake up wondering whether some internet lunatic recognizes their face. That matters. This is where I come back to the phrase I've been using throughout this episode. Toxic empathy. Empathy says a family lost their son. Help them find out what happened. Toxic empathy says a family lost their son. Therefore, whatever they believe must be true. Everybody they suspect is fair game, and anybody who questions the narrative must be against the victim. No, that's not justice. Grief is not evidence. Pain is not evidence. Suspicion is not evidence. Sympathy for one family does not erase the right of another family. If evidence proves one of these boys harmed Nolan, arrest him. Charge him. Try him. If he's guilty, punish him. No race card. No excuse. No politics. But if evidence ultimately shows these boys did not kill Nolan, then what has happened to them matters too. The threats matter. The harassment matters. Public accusations matter. The fear their parents living with matters. And if somebody crosses the line from asking questions into falsely starting as the fact that these boys committed murder, I have no problem with those families exploring defamation cases. There's a difference between saying I want to know what happened and saying those boys murdered him. Those are not the same sentence. When you make the second statement, you better be prepared to back it up. I don't even like the phrase reverse racism. Racism is racism. If a white person treats a black person differently because they're black, that's racism. If a black person treats a white person differently because they're white, that's racism. And if somebody treats me differently because of whatever racial or ethnic category they think I belong to, same damn rule. Most black people I meet, I say hello. They say hello. We go about our own lives. But every now and then, I do encounter somebody where I feel that the racial wall go up. Doesn't ruin my life. I don't go home crying about it. But I'm not going to pretend that I don't see it. Because somebody tells me racism can only travel in one direction. And apply that same standard to Nolan. If the 3 black teenagers were being publicly accused of killing a white friend, with this level of uncertainty, racial activists would be demanding presumption of innocence and warning America not to stereotype these black boys. And you know what? They would be right. So why shouldn't these boys receive the same standard? Right and wrong cannot depend on pigmentation. After all this, Al Sharpton, Benjamin Crump, Tawana Brawley, Trayvon Martin, George Floyd, Black Lives Matter, Ava Moore, Larisha Thompson, Stephen A. Smith, Brandon Tatum, Nolan Wells, I keep coming back to one question. Do we still care about the truth more than the narrative? Because where I'm sitting, that is what is really at stake. The issue is whether America can still look at a case and say, I don't know. I don't know yet. That used to matter. Now everybody seems to need a verdict in 15 damn minutes. Somebody dies, social media finds a racial angle, a lawyer gets a microphone, an activist gets a podium, politicians start talking, media graphics go up, people choose teams. And before investigators have finished collecting evidence, half the country has already decided who the murderer is. That's not justice. That's theater. I believe Al Sharpton has spent decades mastering that theater. I believe Benjamin Crump has figured out how to bring legal leverage into the same public arena. And in my opinion, when those words combine, they can become incredibly powerful. Powerful enough to shape public opinion. Powerful enough to create political pressure. Powerful enough to influence settlements and government decisions. Powerful enough to make institutions afraid of what happens if they do not move quickly. And yes, I believe that power deserves scrutiny. Because who checks the activist? Who checks the lawyer? Who checks the media? Who checks the politician? Who checks the people online screaming that somebody is guilty? Everybody wants accountability until accountability points back towards the person holding the microphone. My question for Sharpton and Crump. So, Al Sharpton, Benjamin Crump, here's my question. If you truly stand for civil rights, whose civil rights? Nolan Wells' civil rights matter absolutely. What about Nolan's friends? What about Ava Moore? What about Larisha Thompson? What about somebody falsely accused of rape? What about somebody falsely accused of murder? What about the person whose reputation is destroyed because somebody with a microphone wanted a clean racial story? Do their civil rights count? Because the civil rights only seem to matter when the racial and political setups point in one direction, then in my opinion, we're not talking about civil rights anymore. We're talking about politics. And believe me, politics have infected too much of this. I believe racial division became politically valuable. I believe activists learned how to build power through it. Media learned how to profit from it. Politicians learned how to campaign on it. And I believe Americans are getting tired of being manipulated by it. That's what I mean by racial fatigue. Not that people are tired of caring about injustice. People are tired of being told every disagreement is racial. People are tired of every police interacting being interpreted racially before the evidence comes out. People are tired of being afraid to ask basic questions. People are tired of the emotional blackmail. Toxic empathy does not question this person they're hurting. I say I can care about your pain and still question your conclusion. I can feel terrible for the grieving parent and still ask whether they're accusing the wrong person. I can believe racism exists and still ask whether race actually caused this particular event. I can believe police misconduct exists and still defend police officers I believe may be wrongfully accused. I can care about black victims and still care about white defendants. Those are not contradictions. That is fairness. I do want the truth about Nolan Wells. Not the white version. Not the black version. Not the Crump version. Not the Sharpton version. Not Brandon Tatum's version. Not CNN's version. Not Fox's version. Not even the version I personally want to believe. What actually happened? And wherever that evidence goes, follow it. If it destroys my argument, so be it. If it destroys Sharpton's argument, so be it. If it destroys Crump's argument, so be it. If it proves these boys are guilty, prosecute them. If it proves they've done nothing wrong, clear their names and start asking how the hell did we allow them to be destroyed before anybody had proof. That's justice. And to Al Sharpton and Benjamin Crump, I will leave you with this. If you truly stand for civil rights, stand for them when politics are inconvenient. Stand for them when the victim doesn't fit the narrative. Stand for them when the accused person is white and innocent. Stand for them when failed democratic policies is part of the conversation. Stand for them when there is no camera. Stand for them when there is no racial angle to exploit. Because otherwise, do not tell me this is about equality. Do not tell me this is about justice. And do not tell me it's about civil rights. Civil rights do not belong to a political party. They belong to one. They do not belong to one race. They belong to every American, period. Nolan Wells deserves it. Nolan Wells deserves the truth. His parents deserve the truth. His friends deserve the truth. And America deserves the truth too. Not outrage. Not slogans. Not racial revenge. Not political inconvenience. Facts. Evidence. Due process. And same standard. That's for everybody. Because empathy without facts can become toxic empathy. And justice without due process isn't justice. It's a mob. Remember those? And that's why. You can't handle the truth. Till next time, I'm Sergeant O. Y'all have a good day. And I approve this goddamn message.
You want answers?
I think I'm entitled.
You want answers?
I want the truth!
You can't handle the truth.